Welcome to the Top 10 Explained series, where we dive in a little bit more detail into the top 10 tips I gave for social enterprise. And this one is number 4, culture. So if we're going to talk about culture, the first thing we need to do is understand what culture is and the things that create it. When it comes to business culture, we're talking about the way people do things, the way people feel about the organisation, the accepted norms of what the business does and what it stands for, its values, its ethos, its principles. Culture is created and reinforced through the stories we share about the business, about our day-to-day work. Culture in the world of social enterprise is huge. One of the greatest influences on the type of culture in a social enterprise stems from how it came about, how it was founded, how it was created. There's two main ways a social enterprise will come into being. One is the founder model. This is where we get the social entrepreneur. You have an individual, maybe it's you, who has looked around and seen a problem, a social issue, an environmental issue, and they've realised that they want to do something about it. And so they set up the social enterprise and they draw people to them. But sat right at the heart of things is the founder, is the social entrepreneur. The other way a social enterprise forms is what I term the community model. This is where instead of an individual, you have a group of people who come together around an issue. For example, I don't know, you might have some parents talking at a school gate and they all start to realise they all share the same sort of concern, and so they all come together around that concern to do something about it. They might decide there's a social enterprise in it, and so together they will set up a social enterprise to address that original area of concern. Both of these are legitimate social enterprises, but as you can probably already tell, the culture of each of these organisations is going to be fundamentally different. Within a founder model, certainly in the first few years, we frequently see a culture that is rapid, moves quickly. It's difficult to be generic about this, however, because the culture that develops will be 100% dependent upon the founder, the social entrepreneur, and what they believe to be important going forward. If you like, the personality, the characteristics of the founder will inevitably become the heart and centre of that social enterprise. Now compare that with the community model. The culture is often more diffuse in a community model because it is an amalgamation, a blending of different points of view. Again, with this, I'm not suggesting one model is better than the other. They are just different. The point I'm making here is that the culture of the organisation will have a direct influence on how the business grows and develops. For example, in the founder model, we will frequently see an organisation where decisions are taken quite rapidly because usually it's the founder who's making those decisions and everyone else is nodding along and saying, yes, yes, whatever you say. And that's fine in some circumstances. But you also need to be aware that if the other people who have been brought onto the board feel they don't have a voice or that their point of view doesn't matter, then at best they're just going to stay quiet, even though they might have something very important to add to the conversation, or alternatively, they'll just leave because they don't feel they're needed. Compare that with the community model. Now, in these situations, we frequently see decision making, certainly in the early days, as being quite a challenge. Because if you've come together as a group and you want to maintain a good dynamic amongst everybody, it's quite common, particularly being very British about it, that people don't want to tread on other people's toes. And so they might not agree with something that's being suggested, but they stay quiet because they don't want to offend or they don't want to cause an argument. And that in itself becomes a problem, because then you're not adopting good governance. So like I say, it's not that one is better than the other, they are just different, and you need to be aware of these differences. What I suggest you do is make culture a conscious choice. Whether you're a founder or a community, decide, what do you want your culture to be? Think about the values, the principles that you want to be recognized for. I mean, marketers might say this is brand, and if that is easier for you to work with, then yeah, sure. Go with that. But for me, it's a little bit deeper, because you want your brand to become your culture. So, do you want to be seen as, I don't know, innovative, out-the-box thinkers? Do you want to be seen as compassionate, understanding? Do you want to be seen as change makers? Whatever term you go for, you then need to consider, how does that translate into the things that you do? How you hold meetings, in your policies, in your procedures. How is your culture reflected throughout the organization? Importantly, from top to bottom or bottom to top, I don't care which way round. One of the worst things I see is the do what I say, not what I do mentality, where staff and volunteers are expected to do things a certain way, but the people at board level aren't included in that. That's not culture. Well, it is, but it's not a very positive type of culture. One of the most useful things you can do when it comes to culture is don't pretend. Get it all out on the table. Agree some ground rules. I frequently recommend to people that they establish a code of conduct, because whilst you might have a governing document, whilst you might have policies and procedures, it's not often that the culture of an organisation is set out in black and white so that people can really understand what is expected of them. By grabbing the bull by the horns, writing out a code of conduct, and bear in mind, getting everybody to feed into that is a really productive way of establishing a culture that everybody feels part of and therefore everyone can subscribe to. Martin Margulis, I think, who says that if you want to understand the culture of an organisation, listen to the stories. And if you want to change the culture of an organisation, then change the stories. So what stories do you want to tell about your organisation?